you're going to watch the game. Why not make money doing it? And why not make it with your friends?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind the Lines, the only sports betting podcast purifying the sports betting industry. Well, how do we do that? We teach you about how the books work, the tricks, the traps, all of the things they do to try to take your money so that you learn how to navigate it and become a profitable sports bettor over time. If you like our content, follow us on all the socials at inplayLIVE. Remember to like, download, subscribe. And if you want to see what inplayLIVE is all about on the inside, we have a promo code for you. That is the Behind the Lines, all caps. And that will get you the very best pricing to join our great community. And today I am very excited to introduce all of you to one of the members of that community. He's not just a member, he is a pro, and he is our pre-game pro, Shawn Schroeder. Thank you so much for joining the show. How are you, man?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. And I am loving that hoodie.
Yes, it's like we, coordinated. It's hilarious. We are definitely already on the same wavelength. Here we are showing up with this awesome hoodie. Schroeder, I've got a few pieces of IPL gear, as I'm sure you do as well. But this is probably one of my favorite because it really, really encapsulates what our community is all about. Mindset, community, value, constantly searching for value. And there are a lot of ways to do it. Now, we on this podcast often talk about all of the stuff we do live, betting on sports live, how we capitalize and find value betting on sports live in the moment. But most sports bettors, recreational sports bettors especially, but a lot of sports bettors and sort of, especially if you're in the early stages of sports betting, chances are you're focusing on pregame. And Schroeder, that is exactly what you do. You are the resident pregame pro at inplayLIVE. You know how to find value before the games begin. And I want to dig into all of that with you here. So first, just start off by giving us all a sense of how you got into betting on sports, how you got into pregame betting, and kind of where it's developed. How long ago did you start?
I started in college, honestly. Sports have always been important to me. Growing up, I didn't really come from a lot of money. Didn't have a lot of those positive things other than sports. Like sports was my foundation to everything. It helped me to fit in, helped everything just work out well. And as I grew up and I was, accepted because of sports, I just watched it all the time. And in college, money's tight. So you try to make a little bit of money here and there. And I would bet on games and I would typically lose those games in college. I didn't know what I was doing. And it kind of burned a fire in me. I'm like, okay, this can be done. Why am I losing? And then it introduced me to data and how to fine tune my selections and start to actually win. So I always tell people, you can't start being good at something until you lose enough money at it and you actually improve, right? Whether it's stock market, sports, or whatever it is, you have to fail a bunch of times before you get better. And I definitely failed a lot in college when I started to do the sports betting pregame. So definitely got started in college and then kind of fine tune in 1% every day, try to get better at it, right? So started about almost 20 years ago, roughly.
I wasn't going to ask you how long ago college was.
Yeah, I still pretend I'm 20. Those of you who were at the Vancouver retreat, you see when I'm playing softball, I pretend like I'm still in my high school days. And you got to stay young, right? And I don't want to date myself, but I just did.
That's okay. That's okay. So you've been doing this for a couple of decades, though. I mean, that is a significant amount of experience, no matter what you're doing.
Absolutely. And the best part about it is just, learning along the way what works, what doesn't work. We had an example of that this year in baseball. Like baseball pregame is really tough. And, in the moment, right, it's tough when you're going through that. But in the grand scheme of things, you ride those storms and you improve now on what didn't work. So, that I would not have been able to do if I didn't have 20 plus years in doing this. And I haven't seen the variance and volatility. So I'm kind of glad that happened because now I know it's just part of the process.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, let's talk about that. What did you do? You had a bit of a tough run doing pregame baseball this past summer. How did you handle it? What did you do?
So, you try to, we talk about 1%, right? So you always want to be betting 1% of your bankroll in theory, depending on the strength of the play. And a lot of times people come to sports betting, and whether you have $100, $1,000 or $10,000, let's just say you have 10 grand, you're not betting $100 a game. People want to hit the home runs. They want to bet 1,000 a game. And if I go 0-5, you're done. And then maybe I win 12 out of 15 after that, but your bankroll's already exhausted. And, I try to compare it to like a 401k. If you have a 401k and you're investing in stocks, would you put that much into a stock? And you're going to be more diversified, right? You're going to have many positions, typically mutual funds, which I look at a mutual fund like sports investing. You're having a lot of games and you're hoping to just grind out profits. It's no different than a mutual fund having a lot of companies and just trying to grind out a little bit of profit. So, with baseball, I stepped back and lowered those percentages, and ultimately, I stopped doing baseball this year. And we've seen how good football's done. We've seen how good everything else is done. We've more than made up for those losses in a very short period of time. So just ride out the storm and ride the waves when the success is there. And we've definitely seen very good success so far with football, especially NFL.
Oh, it's been unbelievable. The success with the pregame in NFL is just like off the charts, man. You are crushing it. So I have to thank you for the work that you're putting in that effort, because it's benefiting my bankroll. So thank you very much for all of that. But I think what people within the community who see your picks and see how successful they are, and for those of you who aren't within In Play Live right now, and you're just sort of listening and you're thinking about it, take my word for it. Schroeder here is a killer with the pregame. And chances are everybody who's listening and watching us wants to know, well, how do you do it? How do you do it?
Well, got a lot of questions on that. Like, what's a filtered play, and what's the data that you use to come up with a play? And without going into specifics, I will tell you I have a lot of different data sources, including databases. Some of you guys know the programs that I use. I won't get into specific names, but with pregame, you typically have a 1% to 2% edge. There are some games where that can be a little bit higher. And you're honestly, you're trying to be as contrarian as possible. I always tell people who are new to sports, does Vegas make or lose money? And everyone's quick to say Vegas makes money. Like,
of course.
Right. So you do the opposite of what everybody else is doing, and you're going to have value. That's, maybe step one. And then you start to ladder different filters. Without going into specifics on those filters, that kind of came into play. Rick Ridge and I, another IPL member, had a conversation about that. And his exact words were, Schroeder, you have way too many plays. How do I just take your best of the best? And that's what kind of brought in some of the stronger filtering process. So there are days I have 50 plays pregame. And some people would I can see Pace right now just shaking his head like, that's crazy. We can't do that. We clearly can't do that to community. So how do you hone in and get the top 3, 5, 10, whatever that number is? And there are a lot of factors there. Without going into specifics, there's certain numbers I look at with RLM, and certain numbers I look at with steam movement and percentages and ticket count, and all those things are factored in. But systems that have been created, without getting into the names again, you factor all that in, and when it all lines up, then it typically becomes a filtered play. If one factor doesn't, like yesterday, for example, I had some plays, but they weren't at my strongest percentage, and I denoted that in the plays, and we saw that in the outcome. So not a big deal because they were 0.5%, and we see with the higher percentage, 2%, 3% plays. 3% is usually the max that I'll recommend on a pregame bankroll play. Those I think are undefeated right now. So
they are.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
So when you average it all out, I mean, we talk a lot about 0.25% or drive units, and if you don't have your bankroll management down pat, you're not going to be successful here, because bankroll management, that is the foundation to build the building. And I struggled with that early on, and sometimes I still struggle with it, to be honest. When Kenny, who's one of our best pros, when he calls a play and he really likes it, I sometimes will overbet because it's Kenny. And, how do you stay grounded to your bankroll and own your own numbers and not get away from that 1% or 2%? Because variance is going to happen. Volatility is going to happen. Whether you're 15-1, it's going to average out. The gambling gods always put you in check. So when you start winning, like right now, I've been doing really well at pregame. And if you haven't been riding, now's not the time to jump in and just start, betting aggressively with pregame, right? You want to be in it for the entire duration. And then when I get cold or hot, you keep slowly grinding and you're going to see a return on investment.
Okay, so a lot I want to dig into there. First, let's talk about the 3% wagers. So this is your essentially your best bets of the week, right? These are the highest level, the ones that you expect the most from, and they've certainly delivered for you. So last season, you went 17 weeks. Every week you had a bet that was in this 3% realm, and it went, I think, 14-3. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. I have to look at my spread, but yeah.
I've got it in front of me here. So it was 14-3. That's what you had posted. This year, we are 5 weeks in, and this wager is 4-0. 1 week, I think it was week 4, you didn't have a 3% play. So you didn't have the best bet, the top level bet in week 4. So out of 5 weeks, you've had 4 of those bets, and they are undefeated so far this season. So 14-3 last season, undefeated so far this season. You talked about filters. How many filters are you applying to arrive at these best bets?
The best bets, there's a minimum of 5 filters. Trying to think if.
And what are we looking at exactly? And I don't want you to tell me what you're using to sort of determine the filters in terms of like the programs that you're using and that kind of thing. But what are you looking at for those 5 filters?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors in there. I mentioned some of those earlier, and those are kind of key. So over the years, I've built a lot of systems with a lot of different factors that, I keep wanting to say the name of the program I used to build that, but so I have a system in place. And then once I have that system, I then put the filters to the system to make sure that it's going to pass. So I've mentioned ticket count. Mm-hmm. Ticket count's huge, right? So that is like the later night games, the bigger profile games, the Georgia versus Alabama, in the NBA, if the Lakers are playing somebody, whatever team Tom Brady was on when he was playing, it's the game that everyone's talking about.
Right.
Those games typically have the most value because the public's all over them. So that's a great gateway to start filtering that game. I tend to do really well on those higher ticket games. And that's the first step. And if that passes the eye test, I'm looking at other things from, again, reverse line movement's a factor, price movement in general with the line. I really like opening line movement because who's betting a line right when it opens? You've got books out there that their sole intention is to sharpen the line. Sunday, they'll release the NFL games for the next week, and they'll open it for 30 minutes to an hour. And the sharps will do exactly that. They'll sharpen the line. They take them off, and then the other books open up after that sharpening's happened. And that kind of tells a story, right? So when you see, oh, wow, the Colts opened up +10. Now they're +7. Obviously, the sharps saw some value at 10. Now, is there still value at 7? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe now it's a play on the other side. And that's where I have some other things that I look at to kind of determine that. So without giving away everything, those are some of the key foundational things that I look at before I say a play or not. And if they all line up, those percentages go up higher with how I bet it. So if everything's passing that eye test, it's going to be a 2% or 3% play.
It's interesting because aside from saying, if it's that there's a lot of eyeballs on the game, meaning that there's a big player involved, like, maybe it was, Patrick Mahomes or, Joe Burrow or Josh Allen or one of these sort of superstar players on one of these teams. For the most part, you're not looking at players. You're not looking at coaches. You're not looking at the team's record. You're certainly not looking at some of the skill positions like, wide receivers and running backs and stuff like that. That I think a lot of sports bettors out there would be thinking to themselves, well, all of that stuff really matters, but clearly it doesn't. You're not looking at it.
No, I don't even care if I watch the game. It's all about the numbers. It's all about the numbers and data. You give me a hundred sample size, I know I'm going to win 55 to 60% of them just based on what the numbers are telling me. And then when you shop those lines and get the best price and you do all those little things to make it even better, Pace, the last time we had done a podcast, he shared a clip from Billions where he said, you watch the numbers, they tell the story. It's the same. Again, whether it's stocks, futures, sports, there's a reason that movement happened. And it typically is big money that moves it. Your bet, my bet, probably aren't going to move the market. Now, Kenny and some of the other heavy hitters in our group, we know what happens there. So
yeah,
why are they taking that bet? There's a reason. And then the books adjust because of that. And then it's just a waterfall with all the other books. And it's good if you know how to read, call it reading the tea leaves. You can literally look at that data and know you have a weighted coin that is going to hit, heads 6 out of 10 times. Why would you not take as many of those bets as you can when you have a probability in your favor? And then you take that and you marry it with our live strategies. And now you've got avenues to not only win both, but if your pregame analysis is wrong because factors have changed live, you actually could come out ahead, even though your pregame was wrong, because now you know how to get out of that with a live strategy play that has a higher probability of hitting than what your pregame analysis was with that 1 to 2% edge.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So you mentioned unit sizing. Talk to me about how you do your unit sizing for pregame versus what you're doing live.
There are two separate bankrolls for that. So I have a pregame bankroll, and then I have a live wager bankroll. And my spreadsheet, I track my pregame stuff, so I know how to allocate my percentages, and then I track Kenny, Pace, everybody else's calls. And I honestly, I look at what's winning and what's doing the best for me. On the videos that I've created for Teachable for the pregame analysis, I say to allocate 10% of your bankroll towards pregame and 90% towards live. Some people would say that, maybe it should be a different balance. I would say this. I would say exactly what Azan has said in the past. And for those that don't know Azan, you should get to know him. He is one of our best bettors that we have in the community, 7-figure guy, great guy. But he always talks about ownership, right? Like, own your own bankroll. Don't blame anybody else for a win or loss. Why are you taking the bet? If Schroeder calls a play, why are you betting it? What's the percentage you're betting? You need to know that. Don't rely on somebody else. But to answer your question, 10% of your overall bankroll should be dedicated to pregame. And then that 1, 2, 3% should be of that 10%. Do I personally bet that? My numbers are higher. I will be honest. I bet a higher amount on my own end because I trust my data. But the primary thing about inplayLIVE is the live wagering, right? So we want to hone in when we have the highest probability of winning. And pregame isn't the highest probability. It's a slow grind and it's a slow, steady ROI. And some of the live wagers we can see, in one day what I may make in a month on pregame units. So once you understand that, we've seen what Kenny can do in a day. I think he's had some 7-0 days, right? So in their high probability situations. So you don't want to have a day where pregame sways your opinion on, say, an under. If I have a pregame under 38 and a team's down 7 or 8 and they're driving, it's probably a good chance that under needs to be thrown out the window and we need to focus on that live call. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. And that also being said, if I have an under pregame and then Kenny calls unders, you better guarantee I am laddering those unders because I already liked it pregame and now Kenny likes it too. So that 1% or 2% call there's a good chance I could get up to 4 or 5% on an under with ladders.
With your live bets and your pregame bets combined.
Absolutely. And there's nothing better than when the script follows pregame and then the live calls also, coincide with that. And you have that confluence that you need. Pregame data said this. We're seeing that happen. Like yesterday, I called, I think, Pacheco's rushing over 74.5 yards.
Yeah.
Didn't hit, but I would take that bet 100 times over because the Broncos defense have allowed that yardage every single time. And you figure Kansas City is going to be up 14, 20, and they should have if they would have converted, right? Kansas City could have been up 2-3 touchdowns yesterday. And what are you going to do? You're going to run the ball once that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. They just didn't capitalize in the red zone.
Yeah. Had they done that, that script would have worked. But what's nice about the live wagering is you could see that it's not working and go the other way. Or you can stay, on that pregame call. And now his yards are 74. Maybe they drop to 58 and you hedge a little bit on that 58. There's a lot of ways to get to that profit point with the live calls and seeing the game with your own eyes, and comparing it to other books to get a good line on it.
So, for everybody out there listening to this, they're probably thinking, though, wait a minute. So I'm placing one wager before the game, and then I'm going to bet against that wager live in the game. And there's, it doesn't sound right, or it's not, necessarily computing. And I totally understand that and can sympathize with that because I went through my own sort of process of taking your pregame calls, but also taking the live wagers and sort of trying to figure it all out along the way. But I want to ask you because you didn't, you were betting pregame in college and you sort of started that, 20 years ago. When did you start live betting and what was the transition like for you?
I started live betting. I mean, honestly, with inplayLIVE is when I really started to dial in on it when I saw the strategies. But, I would test my own theories probably roughly around 5 years ago.
Okay.
And what I like to do, and I'm not saying this is the right thing to do, but I loved when favorites were getting crushed, especially college football or college basketball. There's times where I would see Kentucky or Duke down 15-5, or they didn't start playing ball yet, and you're like, okay, there's no way this team is going to lose to this no-name school, and now you have value on the live line. Now you can also argue that point and say, well, there's value on the dog as well, right? So you have to look at the number and see, what makes the most sense. And for me, I used to chase favorites, and I had this mentality that a good favorite can't lose. And I've shifted from that to see there's actually more value on the dog live since joining inplayLIVE. But you can middle, and you can do all these other strategies that are out there that we teach in the course to help you win both sides. And there's nothing better than taking a team that starts out slow. Maybe they're +8 and then now they're -2, because the game of the flow of the game is going to constantly ebb and flow. And if you hit those key numbers, which we typically talk about live on the streams, then you have a really good chance of hitting both sides. Or, if you see somebody Steph Curry hits 3 or 4 3-pointers in a matter of 30 seconds, typically that's a great chance. Maybe you swoop in and grab an under, where I had hit 4 threes in a row. And you're just constantly laddering and taking what the books give you and trying to hit them at their extreme edges on a line. And then I like to use that and compare it to that pregame line because it usually will normalize. If the pace is 20 points over the total or under, it tends to, come back to that mean. For those that are in the stock market, we call it like a VWAP or a 200 moving average. It tends to always come back to that. So when you can get it at its edges, take advantage of that and try to build a ladder around it.
You've made a few reference now to stock market and that kind of thing. That's because you're actively involved as a trader, or you work in the stock market landscape, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that kind of inform your sports betting? I mean, you sort of touched on it a little bit so far, but do you feel like you're essentially using the same principles?
I do. I think there's a correlation there. The irrationality of people's mindsets. People overreact to everything. You share some bad news on the markets, and what does it do? It tanks 200 points or whatever the number is. If you're a NASDAQ let's just say it drops 200 points. Every market's different. Typically, once that happens, it's going to come right back up. It's no different than, I'm trying to think of a team to even use. The Bills playing Jacksonville is maybe not the best example now because the Bills aren't doing great right now, but pregame favorite 14, 17 points, and there's a pick six, a fumble, a muff punt, and they're down 17-0 in the first 5 minutes of the first quarter. That's going to normalize, or it should, right? Like, so total, same thing. Everything tends to normalize to the mean of what that pregame number was in most cases, not always. And there's going to be value if it doesn't later on in the game too. So you have time to look at it, and the public always overreacts. And we've seen that when quarterbacks get hurt. We've just seen this happen with our NFL strategies. Oh, starting quarterback's out. Aaron Rodgers is out. What do you think most of the people did when they saw Aaron Rodgers get out? They probably hammered the other side. And right, wrong, or indifferent, did you maintain your 1%? Probably not. Did you maintain whatever that allocation was? Probably not. Was there maybe value on the other side to take the quarterback on the Jets that everybody talks shit about, that everybody hates? And there's you ask anybody, nobody gives any credit to that quarterback. There's probably some value there because Vegas knows that. Vegas is seeing the numbers come in. They're seeing the money come in, and they're adjusting their numbers and juice live as the Kennys are betting X amount of dollars. It's a volatile market. It's the same with stocks. And knowing those key numbers and those key price points without revealing our strategies, right? Like, we do that every NFL game with totals. When's the right time? When's the right time to take? We know what that is, but to people watching this, you probably don't, because I guarantee you're not winning more than Kenny is on those calls. So you got to take that volatility with the number, match it with the price being offered at the book, and you're buying or selling. You're over or under. You're plus, you're minus. The correlation in the stock market is very similar. And I think if you're a good sports analyst, the markets just make sense. And I think the circles join. And I think you find yourself somewhere right here in the middle when you do both.
I love that you call it buying and selling, because that's exactly what you're doing, right? You're buying and selling a position on something. And for anybody out there keeping score at home, Zach Wilson and the Jets did win that game against the Bills week 1. That was, we started the season off with a big upset, which was kind of awesome. Okay, so there's another reason that you do pregame, and you do a lot of work, obviously, as you kind of outlined so far, applying those filters and tracking the line movement throughout the week and where things are going. This isn't something that, you just sit down and do on a Sunday morning for an hour, right? Before the games. There's a fair amount of work going into this. So why is pregame so important for your process when you're only using 10% of your bankroll, or maybe a little bit more than that in your case, but you're using a smaller percent of your bankroll than you are with your live wagers? Why is pregame such an important part of your weekly process and your sports betting strategy? Yeah,
so there's a couple answers to that, right? So it's a great question. And I would tell you again, that 10% number that I threw out there, that's going to be determined by you. Like, if you want to make pregame higher or lower, do it. That's just what I recommend, because our focus is on the live wagers. Now, that being said, when you're busy, you're a family guy, and most of our actions on Saturdays and Sundays, typically, you have things you have to do. And there's days where I can't get on a live stream, but I still want to be part of the action. I still want to be checking the scores and seeing how I'm doing. And pregame can allow me to do that. So I love the fact that I can still be profitable and still bet on games and not have to be in front of the screen trying to catch each movement on the live game. There's a couple members that have texted me in the last few weeks that said that exact thing. Like, hey, I had a family party, couldn't be on the live stream, but still made 4 units with your plays pregame. Thank you. And that's exactly what it's about, right? Like, being able to still be part of the action if life takes over. And most of us in this group, we're type A. We have multiple businesses. We're constantly doing something, and our books are getting limited because we are having success. So for those of you listening out there, if you haven't had a book limited, you're doing something wrong. Because everybody in our group that's had success, we've either been limited or kicked out of books. In the pregame, we call it buttering. You pregame bet at a book and you do it quite a bit. These books have larger handles on that market. So, you can go into Bovada at any time and type in bet max on a pregame NFL game. You're probably going to see, I'm going to say 20K, maybe more. Try to do that on a live wager in a third quarter on a Suns Bulls game. You're not going to see that market have as much depth with the numbers that you can bet. Well, why is that? The reason is because you have a higher probability to win that quarter bet, and they know it, so they don't want to put that exposure out there to the book. Do you know that though? Like we know it in inplayLIVE, but the people on the outside may not realize that. Not only that, if you're betting that, your book's going to get limited quicker. I mean, I've opened MGM books and been limited in under an hour. I mean, that's real. So when I hear people talking about, hey, MGM has a line, I'm like, how do you even have how do you have an MGM book, right? Like Bet365, same thing. And those are in theory good problems to have because it means you're doing something right. And if you've buttered that book well enough to maybe get 20, 10, 20K or whatever your number is out of that book, I think that's a win because there's times where I only get 2 or 3, 4K out of a book before I get limited. So to answer the question, the buttering element, the time element, because you still have a life to live and you can't be in front of the computer all weekend doing sports, although we do that, right? A lot of times we are in that position where that's where we're making our money. I mean, I'm not leaving on a Sunday. I'm in front of the screens all day, and there's no place I'd rather be than making money, watching the games with all of my friends and celebrating that. Because you're going to watch the game. Why not make money doing it? And why not make it with your friends? And I've said
Absolutely.
that. And like Shane, I got to meet you in Vancouver. Like, it's so great to put faces with names, the camaraderie, the community, the shit talking, if you will, the lifting each other up. We've got each other's back. And I really believe the community of roughly 1,000 people, we row the boat the same way. And synergy is everything. When you've got 1 + 1 equaling 3 with 1,000 people, we're gonna make more money than somebody that's just betting on their own in most cases. And we really help each other improve and grow and adapt by sharing that and having a community and a forum like this that allows us to do that.
Absolutely. And, I like that, you brought this up, you called it buttering, but essentially what buttering is getting a longer leash with a sports book, because when you win, and we've talked about this at length here on this show, on this podcast, when you win, you get limited, which essentially means you can't bet anymore on the site, or you can bet a quarter or something like that. And if you aren't getting limited on sports books, chances are that means you're not winning. So we want people to be getting limited on sports books because it means they are winning. And so what we do, though, in order to sort of lengthen that leash, to let that sports book let us play for a longer amount of time, is getting those pregame bets in, or as we call it, buttering, to just sort of show the sports book, hey, we are going to make pregame wagers. We're not only going to bet live, even though live is where we're going to make a vast majority of our money. We are willing to make those pregame wagers. And I love your pregame calls for that reason, because I've got specific books where I'm like, oh, this one needs a little love. It needs a little butter. Let's put that pregame wager over here. And, and hopefully it wins. And it often does. I mean, because your pregame is just sort of off the charts right now, especially with NFL, which is really awesome. Okay. Where do you go from here? What does your pregame process look like? Because I know you're the kind of guy that is continually looking to grow, looking to refine things, looking to improve upon. What's next for you?
If it's not broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, if it is broke, fix it. Like right now, I'm still bitter about baseball. Like, I hate that I did not make money in baseball, and I've got to get back to the grindstone and figure that out. It's one of those things that keeps the wheels turning, right? Like, I am going to make money in baseball next year because I am stubborn and I will figure it out, and I won't stop till I do. Now, NFL is doing well, so I'm not going to make a ton of changes there. That being said, I do expect some variance to happen. We're not going to keep hitting at the percentages that we are. We are well over 60% right now in NFL, and that's going to level off a little bit. But you have to know that, like, going into it, right? So where do I go from here? Is just constantly trying to refine and retune and, talk to the other pros on different ideas and create other systems. JW and I talk quite a bit about different systems that we're working on, and we know how brilliant his mind is, and shared something else with someone else, and you put that together and you just come up with new stuff, right? Like, my NHL isn't the best. I do okay at it, but I need to improve there. College basketball is ever changing because the entire teams turn over almost year over year with the one and done type of players. So how can you build a handicapping model when Kentucky's and Duke's of the world, the whole new team every year? So you need that data to kind of get that sample size in to build off of that. So, where I go from here is just trying to constantly improve that and constantly evaluate where the money is being made. AE created that tracker. I think that's huge. You got to know the score for everybody's bets and how to allocate your bankroll to those bets. So constantly trying to get better with that stuff.
Yeah, it's so important, right? To continually be, I'm, a big proponent of tracking, as I've brought up many times here on the show, and trying to figure out, well, what works best in applying deploying your bankroll in those specific areas. It really is everything at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're not in the game, you're going to miss that wave, right? Like, when someone goes on a 20-5 heater, you're already out because you overexposed yourself when they were 2-10 and you lost your confidence. But if you have that tracking and long term they're going to be a winner, you're going to keep grinding. And we've seen it, whether it's in hockey or NFL. I've had last week people message me and said, "Hey, your pregame kept me afloat on a tough week for NFL. Thank you. Like, I actually made money with your pregame, lost a little on live." Now, normally that's the opposite. Like, you never know what that is going to happen, but when they're both hitting and you're getting a win-win, that is going to exponentially be larger than on a win-loss day. And you just, again, I talk about grind because it is a grind. You're not going to get rich overnight on this, but you are going to get a lot of base hits. And if you can win let's just call it 53%, you're going to make money. And if you're not paying too much for juice and you're shopping lines and you're taking numbers that make sense, you're going to win long term. So,
well, and just to go back to things a little bit too, you said you're hitting at over 60%, and you expect it to level off a little bit and maybe come down underneath that, but those top wagers, those 3% wagers, 14-3 last season, that is well over 80%. And I'm not a math guy, but I think that's over 80%. And so far undefeated this season. So, I mean, those wagers are just off the charts, and I don't want to jinx it in any way, but man, let's just keep that ball rolling.
Yeah. And something I'll say to that, like, it's important that people don't go all in on those 3%, because that day that 3% does lose, your 1% wagers may have been up 2 units, and that offsets that, right? Like, the 1% are hitting over 60% right now. And I do know some people are only taking my 2 and 3% calls. That's fine. But I would argue you're leaving a lot of money on the table because there's more 1% plays and they're hitting at a high clip too. So from a unit standpoint, you're going to make more units on the 1%, depending on if you aggregate it over the long haul and say you win 55 out of 100 on 1% plays, but there's 1,000 of them, and you go 6 out of 10 on the 3%, but there's only 50 of them. Unit wise, you're going to come out ahead on that smaller grind. So in relative terms, like, you just have to allocate appropriately to all the plays. And I'm a big fan of saying you should bet everything at that percentage, and you'll make more money long term than if you just take the top play only and bet those. Because if I go 0-2 or 0-3 on a 3% play, you're going to be hurting. And usually when that happens, the 1%'s kind of stabilize that. So I always definitely preach the all or none type of thing with my plays.
Great advice for everybody within the community. And for all of you listening that aren't within the community and you want to get his picks every week, well, again, we have that promo code for you, Behind the Lines, all caps. Come on in, see what it's all about on the inside. check out Schroeder's picks and learn how to bet live with inplayLIVE. All right, Schroeder, buddy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you and sort of shedding some light, sharing some insight on your process. I know many people within the community really wanted to sort of hear from you and kind of get a sense of what you're doing. So thanks again for coming on the show. And for all of you out there who aren't in, this is the kind of pro that you get to work with when you join. And you know, there's guys like Schroeder, and we've introduced you to many others, Canny, John Wilson, you know, several others, Coulter, Taw, so many guys within the community to get to know. You mentioned Azan. He's another guy I want to get on the show very soon because NBA basketball is coming up. Azan, if you're listening, please come on the show. We want you on. All right. The invitation is open. But so many excellent pros within the community that, you know, have such a vast wealth of knowledge like you. So Shawn Schroeder, thank you so much again. And until next week, buddy, keep beating those Bucks.
Let's go.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Lines. Remember to like, download, and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Have a betting story or want to be featured on our podcast? Drop a note in the comments below. And